Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. It's Almanack Day once again, and this time we are looking at army selection with a particular slant, looking at the Grand Army of Bretonia. And once again, as with the previous Almanack, there is an absolute ton of information to digest. So let's crack on. The first point of interest is that the Almanack article references 2,000 points a lot. Now, it does say that Warhammer armies are not going to have recommended points values, but then it talks around how many things you can fit into a 2,000 point army a few times and what you can get per 1,000 points. This does seem to me to indicate that the game has been based around the concept that people are going to be playing at 2,000 points rather than the 2,300, 2,400 points that we saw in 8th edition, for example. We then go on to have a look at what kind of units can fit into our armies, and this is their categorization. So we've got characters, core, special, rare, along with mercenaries and allies. So there's some real fundamental differences here to the way that armies were organized in 7th and 8th edition, potentially giving us some very different scope to include things in our armies. But what does this all mean? So characters, as the name suggests, these are the mighty heroes that can be included in your army. So historically, these were divided into two subcategories. You had lords, the most powerful wizards, the mightiest of warriors, and you had heroes. There is no distinction now. However, from the Kingdom of Bretonian army list, what we see is whilst you can spend 50% of your total points values on characters, you can only have one duke and you can only have one baron or prophetess per 1,000 points. There is no restriction on the characters that would historically have been deemed heroes. So this says to me that they're taking a different approach to really rein in people going overboard on the amount of power, but it also doesn't restrict the points cost to those powerful characters as much. If you can find a way, presumably, of spending the 50% of your army, 1,000 points potentially, on one wizard, then, well, fair play, go nuts. Next, we go on to look at the core, which is the iconic mainstay units of the army. And as with 8th edition, there is a core tax. You have to pay 25% of your points on core units. However, unlike previous editions where you had free choice within that core category for the Kingdom of Bretonia, certainly the Grand Army composition list, there are further restrictions on what you need to do. So, for example, you must take one Knights of the Realm unit, either on foot or mounted, and you must take one peasant unit in the form of men-at-arms and or bowmen. For each unit of Knights of the Realm, you can also then take up to one unit of Knights Errant. So you can't just have Knights Errant, for example, loads of units of those, maybe with one unit of Knights of the Realm. There needs to be a certain degree of balance between those requirements. Then we go on to special, where you can spend up to 50 points of the army value. This is where we find the questing knights, Pegasus knights, squires and mounted yeomen, plus a limit of 0 to 2 battle pilgrims per 1,000 points. I'm really interested to see the return of the mounted yeomen. They're a great unit, and I think they will fit in quite nicely with the Bretonian list, giving them those fast cav sort of options, which will help set up charges and counter charges, particularly if you want to get those Grail Knights into the fray. Talking of Grail Knights, that takes us on to the rare choices. So these are the really unusual forces that you want to include in your army. Here limited to Grail Knights and one field trebuchet per 1,000 points. So a 2,000 point army would see 2 field trebuchets as a maximum. Now's where it gets really exciting, however. Mercenaries. Up to 20% of the army points values can be spent on mercenaries. what are they? Now, it's not entirely clear at this point what counts as mercenaries. My go-to thought is very much from the old 6th edition. Are we seeing Dogs of War making a comeback? Are we going to see Baranga's Besiegers, Voland's Venators, the Halfling Archers, all coming back to Warhammer, the old world? Or, given that those people won't have been born at the time, units of that nature? That's really quite interesting, I think, and will add a certain amount of spice to our armies. We can also have up to 25% of our army made up of allies. So this could be an army of infantry, Bretonnian force, or dwarves, empire, high elves, or wood elves, with dwarves and wood elves being noted as suspicious. So there will clearly be some negatives to taking dwarves or wood elves in a Bretonnian army, but it then allows you to effectively min-max across a couple of different factions in order to get the most powerful force you can. This is going to be really difficult to balance, and if Games Workshop have managed it, all power to them, but I do see this as being particularly problematic. I think it's going to be very difficult to get balanced armies once you're starting to get several factions into the field. There was an event, I remember, I think it was held in Derbyshire in the UK, which did allow allies in 8th edition, and it led to such classics as dwarf armies backed by a couple of steam tanks. It made them incredibly powerful, and there was all kinds of bonkers, ridiculously strong lists floating around. So I'd be very interested, I think, to see how that develops. The article then gives us an example of what a Lord of Bretonia might look like, giving us the stats base size. So again, it confirms regular infantry are 25mm by 25mm. That's nothing new there. We already had that confirmed. The article then provides details of the type of weapons they can have. Interesting, there is a confirmation in here that if a unit or a model is armed with a great weapon, they get always strike last. And it does look like they give a +2 to strength and a +2 armor penetration. So potentially not as strong as they were in 8th edition, but still packing quite a punch. The question being, are you willing to absorb that strike class penalty, particularly with an army that really wants to be charging and getting those big hits in? Looking next at, well, some regular infantry from the Bretonnian army, the men-at-arms, we see they can have stubborn, so first time they take a break test, they don't need to roll a dice, they just fall back in good order if you've got a Grail Monk there. But interestingly, there's a new special rule, which is Shield Wall, allowing the unit to give ground instead of falling back. So interestingly, that infantry will maybe have ways here of countering those big cavalry charges we talked about in previous videos. The article then goes on to talk about the armies of infamy and also to talk around knights preferring an errantry crusade. So it looks like there are going to be at least 3 different ways of playing Bretonnians and assembling your force. Final thing to note is across all the conversation around building an army, it is noted that those factions getting a PDF list, so those not included in the core factions, will be getting a variety of options which Games Workshop stress are balanced, so to make them fully playable and compatible with those core factions right from the outset of the game. So all in all, yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Once again, in the Almanack, I'm really excited personally to see what it means by mercenaries and what the future holds in this space. Is this a way of getting Telia marching to war once again? Who knows at this point, but we can but see. We will know there won't be an Almanack next week on Monday, it being Christmas, but they are expecting Games Workshop to release some information on Boxing Day. So watch this space for more information. Whether I get a video out on Boxing Day, it's highly unlikely because it's Boxing Day. But we'll see what the future holds. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video and the rest of the videos on the Almanacks as they've come out. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.